The wind cut like a knife across the valley, scraping over the frozen ground and howling between the black pines. Snow drifted in thick, uneven piles, hiding rocks and roots beneath its white shroud. Above, crows circled like dark omens, their harsh cries echoing off the jagged cliffs that rose like jagged teeth beyond the homestead. The land was quiet, save for the wind, and Rachel Emery had learned long ago that kind of quiet wasn't peace. It was warning. She stood beside the stump, splitting frozen wood with a dull axe, breath fogging in the brittle air. Each swing jarred her arms, her palms raw beneath worn gloves. Her face was flushed from the cold, but the set of her jaw never softened. She didn't have the luxury of weakness. Not anymore. The little cabin hunched nearby, barely taller than a wagon, its plank walls weathered and cracked. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left. Rachel wiped the sweat from her brow, casting a wary glance toward the tree line. Out here, nothing stayed hidden for long, especially not fear. Her husband, Daniel, had tried to carve a life into this land. He'd believed in the promise of it, the fresh start, the quiet freedom. But the fever that swept through the valley last spring didn't care much for dreams. It buried him in a shallow grave beside the barn, left Rachel with nothing but grief and the bitter taste of unfinished promises. The rifle leaned by the door, always loaded. Wolves howled at night. Tracks circled the barn sometimes. Coyote, maybe worse. She hadn't seen another soul in weeks, but that didn't mean she wasn't being watched. The real danger didn't always come on four legs. Settler tongues wagged with fear these days. Murmurs of tension rising between the Lakota bands and the ranchers, the trappers, the railroad men slicing their way west. A skirmish here, a burned wagon there. Folks blamed the Lakota for every missing cow, every snapped fence post. Rachel didn't know what to believe anymore. Grief made it hard to trust much of anything. By midday, the sky had turned to lead, the sun hidden behind thick clouds, promising more snow. The creek down by the ravine would be frozen solid soon. If she wanted water, she'd better fetch it before the storm set in. Rachel bundled her coat tighter, slung her rifle over one shoulder, and trudged through the snow, boots crunching over the frozen ground. The path to the creek wound past the skeletal remains of the summer garden, now buried beneath ice and memory. The wind whistled in her ears. Every shadow seemed sharper than it should. The pine trees loomed like sentinels, their dark branches heavy with snow. She reached the creek, icy water still trickling between the frozen banks. Kneeling, she broke the thin crust of ice, filling her bucket. The cold bit at her fingers. Her breath hung in the air like smoke. That's when she saw it, a dark shape downstream, barely visible against the snow. Rachel straightened, heart tight in her chest. Squinting against the weak light, she made out the figure, a body slumped in the snow near the rocks. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Dead. She crept closer, boots silent over the crusted snow, the rifle heavy in her grip, her pulse hammered in her ears. The figure was a man, young, late 20s, his dark hair matted with snow and blood. His face, sharp-boned and handsome beneath the grime, bore the proud features she recognized from whispered warnings in the settlement. Rachel's stomach clenched. The stories flooded her mind. The raids, the cattle stolen, families driven from their land. The bloody clashes blamed on men like him. But the stories never mentioned them bleeding alone in the snow. An arrow jutted from his back, buried deep between his shoulder blades. Blood stained the snow beneath him, dark and vivid against the white. His breath came shallow, barely stirring the air. His lips were blue from cold. He was dying. Rachel's grip tightened on the rifle. Every ounce of caution, every hard lesson from the past year screamed at her to leave him. Walk away. Let the storm finish what the arrow started, but then she saw his eyes. They fluttered open, dark and glassy with pain, unfocused. No hatred, no threat, just the raw, human terror of a man on death's door. Rachel hesitated. The wind howled around her, sharp with ice. A storm was building, and if she left him, her late husband's voice echoed in her mind, warm and certain. We're all just people out here, Ratch. Same blood, same bones. Don't let fear make you forget that. Rachel's jaw clenched. Damn him for still being right. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, knelt beside the man, and grabbed a fistful of his coat. He was heavy muscle and dead weight, but she'd hauled sacks of feed heavier than him. Her sled lay near the path, meant for firewood. It would carry him, too. Gritting her teeth, she dragged him onto it, the snow slick beneath her boots. His eyes fluttered weakly, but he didn't fight her, didn't have the strength to. The arrow jutted from his back like an accusation. She'd seen wounds like that before. It was a wonder he wasn't dead already. With one last glance at the tree line, Rachel hauled the sled toward her cabin, the man's body bumping behind her. Her breath burned in her chest, but she didn't stop. The storm was coming, and with it, she had a feeling so was trouble. The cabin groaned beneath the weight of the wind as Rachel dragged the sled through the doorway, snow spilling across the wooden floor. The man on the sled, barely conscious, skin pale against the dark stain of blood on his coat, was dead weight now, but not dead, not yet. She slammed the door shut behind her, bolting it against the coming storm. The windows rattled in their frames. Beyond them, the world vanished beneath a curtain of snow. Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears. Her rifle leaned in the corner, but it wasn't bullets that would save him now. It was hands, steady hands, and she wasn't sure hers were steady enough. She dropped to her knees beside him, breath hitching in her throat as she peeled away the frozen coat. His shirt was torn, skin slick with blood. The arrow jutted from his back, wicked and deep. Rachel's mind raced. Her late husband, Daniel, had been no doctor, but he'd apprenticed under one in Missouri. She remembered enough. The way he'd cleaned wounds, the quiet confidence in his voice as he stitched skin. But this, an arrow buried between the shoulder blades? She wasn't sure even Daniel could have fixed this. Still, she grabbed the kettle from the hearth, poured steaming water into a basin, and tore strips of clean cloth. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the shaft of the arrow. The warrior's eyes snapped open, dark and sharp, despite the fever clouding them. "Easy," Rachel whispered, unsure if he understood her. His gaze darted around the room. Low ceiling, stone hearth, rifles on the wall, but there was no strength left to fight. Only the weight of pain, heavy and consuming. "I have to pull it," Rachel told him, voice shaking. "You'll die if I don't." Maybe he couldn't understand her words, but he understood the look in her eyes. After a long moment, his head sagged back against the floor. Surrender. Or maybe trust. Rachel braced herself, wrapped her hands around the shaft, and pulled. The arrow slid free with a sickening, wet sound. Blood welled up fast and hot. She pressed cloth to the wound, working quickly, her breath shallow, heart pounding. By the time she finished binding him, the cabin was darker, the storm louder, and the warrior unconscious. Fever came fast. His skin burned beneath the rough blankets. His breathing grew shallow, labored. He muttered in a language Rachel didn't understand, eyes fluttering beneath heavy lids. She sat by the fire, staring at him, her mind tangled in doubt and fear. Who was he? The Lakota were close. She knew that much. Ranchers gossiped in the settlement, spitting warnings like venom. Some claimed war was coming, that every shadow in the trees held a painted face, a drawn bow. Now, one of them lay bleeding on her floor, and she'd brought him here. Rachel didn't sleep that night, Morning came, gray and bitter. Snow piled against the door. The wind had eased, but the silence outside was heavier than before. The warrior stirred, his dark eyes blinking open. Rachel sat across the room, rifle resting in her lap. Her hands shook, but her gaze stayed steady. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The language divide stretched between them, thick as the winter fog. Finally, he cleared his throat, voice weak, but steady enough. Rachel frowned. He tapped his chest, eyes holding hers. "Chayton," he repeated, then pointed outside, tracing a falcon's flight with his hand. "Falcon," Rachel whispered, understanding dawning. "Rachel," she offered in return, hand over her own chest. His eyes lingered on her face, curious, wary, but alive. Over the next hours, broken English gestures and strained patience pieced together the truth. Chayton was Lakota, a scout, a warrior. But his wounds weren't from settlers, not entirely. Rival warriors, bounty hunters, betrayal. The words came halting, strained. But the message was clear enough. He'd been ambushed, hunted, left for dead. His people were close, watching, hidden among the ridges, the pines. Rachel had known they were near, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine. Tension rippled beneath every glance. His tribe was restless. Blood had been spilled on both sides. The settlers whispered about raids. The Lakota spoke of broken treaties. Now, the balance teetered on the edge of war, and she dragged one of their wounded into her cabin. By midday, the snow eased enough to reveal tracks outside, hoof prints along the ridge, too deliberate to be hunters, too fresh to ignore. Rachel's gut twisted. Someone was looking for him. She stood by the window, rifle cradled in her arms, watching the tree line. Her reflection in the glass was ghostly, eyes wide with fear. Behind her, Chayton shifted on the bed, watching too. His gaze wasn't just guarded now, it was grateful. Cautious, but grateful. That night, as the fire crackled low, Rachel stared at the floorboards, her husband's voice heavy in her ears. "It's easy to hate what you don't understand," Daniel used to say. "But out here, all we got is each other. You forget that, you don't last long." Her fingers traced the medicine pouch, now resting on the table. Chayton had offered it to her earlier. A gesture, small but meaningful. A symbol of protection. Maybe. Or trust. The fear still simmered beneath her skin, but it warred with something else now, the faintest ember of understanding. She poured water into a cup, brought it to him. Chayton took it, fingers brushing hers, brief and warm despite the fever. For the first time, neither flinched. As the last light of day bled across the snow, Chayton's strength faltered again. But before his eyes slid shut, he pointed to the horizon, face grave. "They come," he rasped, voice raw. "Dawn, war paint." Rachel's throat tightened. Not bounty hunters, his people, and they wouldn't come with words. The room felt smaller now, the walls thinner. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm was on its way, and when it arrived, there'd be no hiding from it. The wind clawed at the cabin walls like restless fingers. The shutters rattled. Snow hissed along the roof. But inside, Rachel Emery sat wide awake by the cold embers of the fire, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the window. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving only silence and the creeping unease that nestled in her chest. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. Not with his words echoing in her mind. "They come, dawn, war paint." On the cot by the hearth, Chayton lay still, eyes closed, his breathing shallow but steady. His fever had broken sometime in the night, though weakness still clung to him like a second skin. His dark hair spilled across the pillow, his brow damp with sweat. Even now, wounded and fragile, he looked dangerous. But that wasn't what scared her. it was what was coming. Rachel's fingers tensed on the rifle stock. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows along the log walls. Her heartbeat sounded loud in the stillness. She rose as the first pale light of dawn crept through the frosted glass. Outside, the snow-covered prairie glowed faint blue, untouched for now. And then they appeared. Dark shapes broke through the trees beyond the ridge. Silent, steady, 7 riders, faces painted in red, black, and white, feathers braided into long hair, bows strung, rifles slung across their backs. Their eyes, sharp and unblinking, fixed on the cabin like hawks circling wounded prey. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They were here, just as Chayton warned. She turned to him, his eyes open now, watching her. Weak, but lucid, he gave a faint nod, confirming what she already knew. "Stay here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could. Heart pounding. Rachel pulled on her coat, grabbed her rifle, and stepped outside into the snow. The cold slapped her face, but her grip stayed steady. She kept the rifle low, barrel down, though every muscle screamed to raise it. The riders approached in silence, horses' hooves muffled by snow. Their leader rode at the front, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face hard as carved stone, his features weathered and proud. His war paint streaked across his face like blood and shadow. They reined in a dozen yards from her cabin. No words, no greetings, only suspicion burning in their eyes. Rachel's fingers tightened around the rifle. The leader dismounted, his boots crunching over the snow. The other warriors remained on horseback, bows and rifles ready but not raised. Yet Rachel swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall. Her heart hammered in her ribs. The leader's dark eyes scanned her. His gaze drifted to the door behind her, then back to her face. "Where is he?" His English was clipped, sharp as flint. Rachel hesitated, searching his eyes for anything mercy, fury, doubt. She found only caution, and beneath that, pain, the kind that came from too many funerals. "Inside," she answered quietly, nodding toward the cabin. "He's alive." "Barely." The man's eyes narrowed. The wind whistled through the trees. "You help him." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "I tried." The warriors on horseback shifted, their gazes cutting through her. Suspicion, accusation, centuries of anger bound up in their silence. Rachel took a steadying breath, lifted her chin. She didn't raise the rifle, but she didn't lower her eyes either. "I found him in the snow," she explained, voice firm but calm. "Arrow in his back. He'd have died out there." The leader studied her, unreadable as granite. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint creak of pine branches. Tension crackled like dry tinder. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Rachel's head whipped around. Chayton stood in the doorway, weak but upright, one hand braced against the frame. His face was pale, jaw clenched tight, but his eyes clear and steady. The leader's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise beneath the stern mask. Chayton spoke in Lakota, low, firm words that Rachel couldn't understand, but the effect was immediate. The warrior's posture eased, weapons lowered, shoulders relaxed. Chayton's gaze met the leader's, the exchange heavy with meaning Rachel couldn't decipher. Then the leader approached him, gripping his forearm gently, eyes softening. Rachel stood frozen, the weight of the rifle forgotten in her hands. Chayton turned to her, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he spoke, quiet, steady. "You saved me." It wasn't a question. Rachel simply nodded, unsure what else to say. Aftermath. The leader gave her a slow, measured nod. Not gratitude exactly, but respect. "No harm," he said simply. "You helped our brother. That matters." The warriors dismounted, gathering Chayton gently, supporting his weak frame onto a horse. Rachel stood in the snow, numb with cold, heart heavy with uncertainty. Before they left, the leader paused beside her, but his eyes flicked toward the horizon, voice low and grim. Next time may not be so simple. War comes easy, peace hard. Rachel's throat tightened. She gave a small nod. I know. They rode off, disappearing into the pines as the sun clawed its way over the ridges. Chayton looked back once, eyes lingering on her, full of things unspoken. A silent promise? Maybe. Or maybe just understanding. And then he was gone. Rachel stood there long after the hoofbeats faded, her rifle dangling at her side. The snow began to melt under the early sun, drip by drip, revealing the stubborn earth beneath. The cabin still stood. The wolves still howled. The world hadn't changed. But she had. She wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. Only that, for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. Rachel turned toward the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. The ridge glowed under the morning sun. The wind whispered through the pines, and in the distance, the uneasy peace of survival settled over the valley. Sometimes compassion crosses the lines that fear draws in the dirt, and it might be the only thing that keeps the West from burning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Out here, every story counts.